So we are on page 1159. This week's Parshat is Shoftim, which literally means judges. So it is a Parsha that's full of very interesting concepts, very interesting ideas. We're going to talk about leaders. We're going to talk about prophets. We're going to talk about dead who are found unclaimed, unknown, dead in the middle of the way. What happens? Very, very interesting topic. So we're just going to do what we usually do, is go through a quick overview of the whole Parsha, topic by topic, quite shortly, and then we'll go back to the concept of kings, and we'll talk about that a little bit longer. So on page 1161, the Parsha starts off that Shoftim v'Shotrim, judges and policemen, you should put it on all your gates. You should establish courts of justice. You should establish a law system, and that's the way you're going to run the land. In the prophecies of the redemption, it says that I will return your judges as in the past and your advisors. It doesn't say your judges and your policemen. So right now, we in the current times, well, when we were in the temple in the Holy Land, we had judges and we had police. Because if you have no law enforcement, there's no reason to have a judge. If the judge could say the law from today to tomorrow, but without a policeman, without law enforcement to actually carry it out, the judge is pretty useless. But it says in Mashiach's times, in the prophecy in Isaiah is that there will only be judges and advisors. It says, it doesn't say police. There won't be any police. There won't be law enforcement, because then you're not going to need someone to enforce and tell you what to do, and then make sure you actually do it. You'll have an advisor who will be more on your level, who will guide you towards your correct choice. And a lot of times they have now in the world, people are talking about, instead of bringing law enforcement or whatever different political ways of thinking, so they're going to get ahead of themselves. In Mashiach's time, it's true, there won't be policemen, there won't be law enforcement. But right now, while there's still evil, while there's still negative in the world, we still need to have judges and police. The Parsha continues that these judges shouldn't pervert justice, they shouldn't take bribes. It says that bribery will blind. If you look at the words, verse 19, bribery blinds the eyes of the sage and perverts the just words of the Torah. If the judge will take a bribe and decide that he's still going to be impartial, doesn't help, because the moment you have any impartiality, anything that you got from one person, you're not going to judge clearly. You're not going to judge professionally. It's going to be already tainted by the person who bribed you. And the Talmud goes to quite great lengths to explain how much the judges try to stay away from any type of bribe, any favor, any even someone opening the door for them. That's already and it's giving them that honor. That's already some sort of bribe that they would recuse themselves from the case. And there's a famous verse here, verse 20. It says, "Justice must be pursued." So, firstly, it means you have to pursue justice. It's a very Jewish cause, But as well, the Talmud learns that justice you shall pursue. It's always chase after a place of study. Meaning, even if the place of study is not in your locale, not in your hometown, not in your place, you have to go there. You have to pursue where justice or where study, where Torah can be found. You have to go to that place to. The expression is go after each teacher to their place. So, Rabbi Akiva was in Bnei Brak, go after Rabbi Akiva to Bnei Brak. It was a teacher who lived in Rome. Go to Rome for that teacher. Wherever it is, you go for the place you can study. Then the Parsha continues with a discussion about different laws of idolatry that we've already discussed in the previous Parshas, but especially about not planting a tree in the temple. We spoke about it last week quite a bit. That different religions use trees, were very prominent in their worship, and we have a mitzvah not to plant a tree in the temple.
Because it's considered idol worship? Is that
because this was the way that the idol worshippers worshipped idols. Even making a single stone altar, Avraham made a single stone altar. Yitzchak made a single stone altar. Yaakov made a single stone altar. But because now the idolaters you do that, all altars, all mizbeach that would be in the temple would have to be made of multiple stones, not of single stones. And there's more laws of idolatry. And there's discussion that for all matters that come up as a quandary, you're not sure which way to go, you always approach the judge in your time. What does that mean? Even if the judge in your time is not Moses, because it's not Moses, or not Joshua, or not the highest, whoever it is at your time, he's the one who will come to the decision. And there's a mitzvah here to listen to the Sanhedrin at every stage. The Sanhedrin is the high court of 70 judges who would basically be the final arbiters of what the Torah perspective on any case that comes up, any question. If you look at the words in verse 8, between blood and blood, between each case, between whether something's a lesion, matters of dispute, whatever it is, they're always going to be the ones to be the final arbiters. And actually, the Sanhedrin sat in the temple. Specifically, because the laws here are next to each other, the laws of making Mizbeach, making an altar, and then it says the laws of the Sanhedrin. So the way it was understood from that is that the Sanhedrin should actually be located on the temple. And there was the highest court of the Sanhedrin, which was right after the Azara, right after the temple courtyard. And then there was lower level ones which were on the Temple Mount. But it's very interesting that in the place of the worship is also the place where the Torah comes from. And what's learned out from there is that you should actually study in a shul. You would think that a synagogue is a place of prayer, and a study hall is a place for yeshiva, a bet midrash, a study hall is a place for the study. But there's actually an idea to study next to the place or in the place that you also worship, you pray. The Parshat continues with a discussion of appointing a king, which we'll just touch on now. We'll come back to soon. It says that, on page 1165, verse 14, you're coming to the land, you're going to say that I want to appoint a king over myself like all the nations around me. Now, if anyone knows from the book of Samuel, when the book of Shmuel, when they did ask God for a king, asked Shmuel to appoint a king, Shmuel was quite upset at them. We spoke about it in Parshat Korach. That was the Haftarah of Parshat Korach. And the main crux of the issue that Shmuel had, and also was hinted to in the verse here, is that I want a king like all the nations around me. A Jewish king is very different than a king of purely political nature, like the kings of the nations around them. And the way they framed the question, the way they framed the demand to have a king, was in a way a rebellious way of asking for a king, and not a way that a king who could connect them and could be intermediate between them and God. Now, we'll talk about the mitzvahs of a king. These mitzvahs can only be fulfilled by a king. And the king fulfills those mitzvahs on behalf of all of us. Because, again, the 630 mitzvahs were discussed in the past, but many of them we can't fulfill. If you're not a Kohen, you don't have the Kohen ones. If you're not a Levi, you don't have the Levi ones. And some of the ones that only apply to Israelite, the Kohen doesn't have, etc., etc. If you never have a firstborn child, you can't do that. And there's so many mitzvahs that are only practical if you have the situation. Especially the laws of a king, which is obviously very limited amount of people, to a generation who would have the laws of a king. But when the king does those mitzvahs, he fulfills them on our behalf. What are his mitzvahs? The first mitzvah is you can't appoint a foreigner as a king. It has to be someone from the Jewish blood to be a king. The second mitzvah is he should not have too many horses. Have as many horses as he needs to ride his chariot. What's the reason why he shouldn't collect too many horses? Because if at the time, where were horses imported from? Egypt. And if you look at verse 16, it says, he should not acquire more horses for himself, so that he not bring any of the people back to Egypt in order to procure these horses. But God said you should never return to Egypt. You should never go back to Egypt. Which is obviously raises a question, because we've had Jewish communities in Egypt throughout history, and especially Maimonides, the Rambam. Where was he a rabbi and a physician? In Egypt. And he writes in his own book that you're not meant to go back to Egypt.
I'm confused about the verses 14 and 15, because it says that you should appoint the king, and then it says, well, you should that God appoints. So who should appoint the king? Is it God should appoint the king, or should you accept the king that God is appointing? So because you are not to appoint, you need to accept the king. So what is that you need to appoint? It
says you should appoint a king over yourself. You have to accept him as a king over yourself. There's no such thing, as we'll discuss later. A king without a nation is not a king. He's a tyrant. He's a dictator. If the people don't take them, accept his yoke as his rulership, his royalty over them, then he's not a king. He's a dictator. and that's not what we're talking about here. It's a two-pronged thing. God obviously has to.
I understand. There are in the whole history of Jewish kings, there were only 6 kings that were actually anointed.
Anointed, yes.
Anointed, right?
Yes.
The rest of them were, if you are a king, your son will become a king.
So then another mitzvah of the king is not to have too many wives. What's too many wives? It says 18 wives. King David had 18 wives because it said he had 6, and the prophecy told him you'll have like these and like these, which was another 6 and another 6. That's 18 was the max. We'll get into the whole discussion. I know Allah's here, so we'll have to go to discussion how King Solomon had 1,000 wives and how that was not okay or was okay, but it wasn't okay. Okay, but the halacha is a king shouldn't have more than 18 wives. Well, there are different reasons for each of the mitzvahs. The reason why he shouldn't have too many wives is he shouldn't be distracted from his duties. The reason why he shouldn't have horses, the Jews shouldn't go back. And the third mitzvah is he should not acquire too much gold and silver. He should have enough gold and silver to pay his armies, to run his country, but not to collect. Just to get to be the first trillionaire, just to be the first trillionaire of the world. There's at least a purpose to his for his wealth. Now, it says that if the king fulfills these mitzvahs, then he has to do another thing. He needs to write 2 Torahs. Every Jew will learn in a few weeks is enjoined as a mitzvah to write himself a Torah. If you don't write yourself a Torah, you could join with others in a Torah. That's when people buy a letter or buy a verse in a Torah. And then today also the mitzvah of writing a Torah includes buying Jewish books. Well, we'll speak about that in a few weeks. But a king, in addition to the single Torah that every Jew needs to write himself a second Torah. One he leaves at home in his treasure houses, regular Torah, and the second Torah he needs to carry around with him all times. Look at verse 19. The Torah must remain with him physically at all times. He has to read from it every day of his life, so he may learn to revere God, his God. To safeguard all the words of the Torah and these rules, and to know how to properly perform them. So the king has, more than anyone else, has this special mitzvah of literally, I guess this as a miniature Sefer Torah. It wasn't a big one. It wouldn't be really
Is that an OG Duffler main sort of?
Yeah.
thing?
But why a king specifically had this mitzvah? Because a king, as we'll speak about later, has many more possibilities for temptation, many more possibilities to go off, and also has much more responsibility. So therefore, he has to be constantly reminded and have a Torah on him at all times. Wherever he's going in, he's going out. He should have that memory. He should have that thing to make him recall. As it says in verse 20, so his heart will not become haughty. And then it says here, and it should prolong his time over his kingdom, he and his sons among Israel. That's how you learn that if the son is qualified to be a king, he precedes everyone else. A different discussion is that once King David was anointed as king, there will always be a descendant of King David that is possible to be king, and all the way until Mashiach, there will be a descendant from King David. Even when there were kings from other dynasties at the same time, God made it himself, as well as if you learn in the prophets, God made a promise to King David that he will, the rulership, the royalty, the kingship has passed on to David's family. Okay, that's in short the story of the king. Then in the third reading on chapter 18, is the laws of the Levi gets, as we've spoken quite a few times, that the Levi gets different gifts from the Levim, and the Kohanim get different gifts from the Jewish people. We spoke about it more like the Parashat Korach. And the reason is, again, because he doesn't get a portion of land, he doesn't live a regular life, he gets his payment that way. Now, the way they actually functioned, the Levim, was there were 24 families of Levim and 24 families of Kohen. And they did a week roster, and they basically would get about 2 weeks a year, and then change. So it was 48, that's 24, and then 24, and then and so it would go in a roster. A Kohen family would have a week to serve in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. Now on the holidays was all Kohanim, on Pesach or Shavuos or Sukkot, all Kohanim, all Levim. There was no those were off roster, meaning firstly there was a lot more sacrifices at the time because all the Jewish people come up, as we spoke about last week, and it was a holiday spirit that any Kohen who wished to serve was allowed to serve. Then we speak about the, as I also mentioned last week, about not doing all the witchcraft, magic, divinations, consulting different cults, divine, all the different divining, the scorpions, whatever it is, communicating with the dead, many, many different common magical practices at the time. There's actually a discussion. The Maimonides holds that there's no such thing as all the witchcraft is all fake. It's all a hoax. It's all fraudsters playing tricks. Other Maimonides, other commentators learned that there is such a power, but I think today, even to this day, all the witchcraft is all a game. It's not hocus pocus. It's not actually they're not actually channeling into any powers, any negative evil forces. There's an expression that the Baal Shem Tov says that they say in the name of Baal Shem Tov that he from his time there was no more actual evil eyes or power to the negative forces.
Not that it has any power, but just the words.
They say that abracadabra comes from the words ebra. I will create kadabra like I speak. It could be. I don't know.
How about the golem? That's
the golem's a different discussion. Yeah. Now, although we're not meant to consult these things, we're not meant to consult any of these divinations, any of these witchcraft, sorcerers, consultant, all that stuff, oracles. We don't go there. God does give us something, and He gives us prophets. We spoke about a little bit last week that a prophet can never go against the Torah. One second, you're going to ask me the famous story of Elijah, Eliyahu on Mount Carmel, that he made a whole trick, a whole story with the two altars, and the fire came down from heaven. Why was he bringing a sacrifice outside of the temple? That's going against the Torah. The Torah says you can only sacrifice in the temple. So the idea is that something called Harat Sha'ah, which means a temporary injunction. Elijah didn't come and say the mitzvah no longer is true. There's no longer this mitzvah to only sacrifice in the temple. It says that mitzvah is fully in place, but because of what's happening right now, we're doing this test with the prophets of the Baal. We're doing a temporary injunction, and it's allowed in this case. So that's very different than saying the Torah is not true or changing the law in the Torah. So if you look at verse 18, it says, it's on page 1169. I will authorize a prophet from them from among their brothers like you. I will place my words in his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I command him. So there's actually an interesting idea that says like you. A prophet will only be like Moshe. There will never be a prophet as great as Moshe. Moshe's prophecy is at a different level than any other prophet. The descriptions are that Moshe, I think we also spoke about in Parshat Balotcha, that Moshe speaks to God face to face. Moshe doesn't lose himself. A regular prophet goes into a trance, goes into a out-of-body experience where he loses his function, control. Another interesting idea is that prophet has to be happy when he gives a prophecy. That's why there's a story in the book of Kings of the prophet Elisha that he was very sad. He couldn't do prophecy when he was sad. He asked him to bring a musical accompaniment to get him into a good mood, and then he would be able to prophesy. Interesting fact. Now, how we know who's a true prophet and who's a false prophet? So you give a test to the prophet. You have to see if he says the name of God. If he says something, he prophesies something in the name of God, you have to see that it comes to pass. Now, if a prophet says something negative, says that, let's say, this place will be destroyed, and it doesn't happen, there's no proof. Why? Because if the people do teshuvah, people do repentance, or whatever it is, God will change his mind, and there'll be a new ruling about that place, or not about that negative thing that was meant to happen. But if he prophesies something positive, it doesn't come to pass, then it's proof that he's not a real prophet. There's a discussion, and if people know the book of Jeremiah, there's a discussion of two prophets, that Yirmiyahu, prophet Jeremiah, and someone called Hananiah ben Azur, who was a false prophet, who Hananiah ben Azur was prophesying that Jerusalem will not be destroyed. Jeremiah was saying Jerusalem will be destroyed. Jeremiah tells him that if what I say is not true, it doesn't happen, doesn't disprove that I'm a true prophet of God. If what you're saying doesn't happen, that disproves that you're a prophet of God, because you said it's not going to be destroyed, and if it is destroyed, then you're disproven. So a positive prophecy will definitely happen. A negative prophecy, let's say Jonah went with the big fish, went to Nineveh. We speak about on Yom Kippur that he went and warned the city. They did repentance. They repented. They did the right thing, and that was it. The city wasn't destroyed. Then there's a discussion which I think has come up almost every single week in Sefer Devarim, and also the last week of Batas Maseh. The last week goes in the Book of Numbers with Bamidbar, which is the cities of refuge. That might be coming out of people's ears, but there's the idea of setting up the cities of refuge for someone who murders mistakenly, by mistake. One thing which is added in this parsha is that it says, look at verse 3. It says, prepare for yourself the way to these cities by posting signs pointing the way. That one of the mitzvahs is to put up proper
question about why in different parshas the same things are repeated, because it's a common thing. The why different.
So in general, this book of Devarim is a repetition of the whole Torah. So the rule by definition should be a repetition of all the mitzvahs that were said, many of the mitzvahs which were said previously. Within the Devarim itself, why one parsha after another parsha Moshe will repeat, each time it adds different points and stresses. But you have to really examine what actually is being added in each parsha. Because let's say in Parshat Devarim, we spoke about the cities of refuge. We spoke about Moshe said that you have to do 3 in the land of the east bank of the Jordan. In the next parsha we spoke about it, we said that Moshe actually did it, even though he wasn't able yet to do all of them because he wasn't crossing into the West Bank. This week we're talking more for a point to prepare the way, meaning part of the setting up these cities of refuge was putting up signposts that say, this is the direction to the city of the refuge. And the Talmud actually described these to make very wide highways, so that way you would be clear signage, clear, be able to know. Maybe it was better than Vic roads. You'd be actually able to know. Be able to know how to get to the city of refuge. And the Rebbe one time actually commented that the month of Elul is like a city of refuge of the year. The month of Elul is a time which we're coming up to, the 12th month of the year, right before the high holidays. The time to prepare yourself for the new year, and it's like a city of refuge. And everyone could be a signpost. Everyone could be telling all the acquaintances, everyone they know, hey, it's coming up to the month of Elul. It's a time to get involved in studying, get involved in prayer, get involved in giving charity, and everyone as standing as a signpost could encourage other Jews towards preparing for the new year. That should be a good and inscribed and sealed for good. That's about the signposts. Then, interestingly, verse 8 speaks about future cities of refuge. Right now we know there's 3 cities of refuge in the east bank of Jordan, modern day Syria, Jordan, that area. There's 3 cities of refuge in land of Israel proper, on the west bank and of the Jordan. In the future, when God will make the land bigger in Mashiach times, there's going to be another 3 cities of refuge established then. Now, I'm asking an obvious question: why do you need cities of refuge in Mashiach's times? So there's different answers to this. One of them is that for all the people who throughout history have been in a case where they need to go out to the city of refuge, they'll do that in Mashiach's times. The question is, if there's no murder, why would you need a city of refuge? That's the question. Why would you need 3 more? Yeah. Another 3, yeah?
Yes.
No, but what happens next? Okay, so all these people who accidentally killed someone, so they go to the city and they live there?
They live there till the Kohen Gadol passes away. Till the high priest passes away, then their exile sentence is over. And they won't be killed, or they won't be...
So it's kind of like a Jewish way of a prison, so some kind of...
It's not prison, but it's exile, meaning they're going to live in a city. The idea is that the people who live in those cities are the Levim, and they'll, if you surround yourself with people who are meant to be better people, and people who are meant to be studying, and people meant to be on a more higher spiritual plane, that will help you grow from the negative things that you did. Then we have an interesting law, verse 14 on page 1173. You should not push your neighbor's landmark, which your predecessors have erected, as border markers. So, I don't know if you know my parents' house, our neighbor, decided one day, well, when they were building the house next door to us, they just did a few, maybe a meter into a meter and a half.
Maybe it's the law.
I don't know, a nice little border marking change. My parents thought that those are going to be the neighbors are going to stay there, so they didn't want to get into a fight with them, and then they ended up selling the house and whatever. But this is the mitzvah not to move the landmark. Now, interestingly, besides that, the Talmud learns that this idea of not moving a landmark is also not moving custom of a place. If a community or a shul or a congregation has a custom, don't move those landmarks. Those landmarks are the previous generations have put them in place. This is their custom. The shul it runs in this way, or the community runs this way. Don't move the landmarks. Keep them as they were. That's what Talmud learns out from this verse. Besides for the practical, no, don't steal your neighbor's property. And also learned out from here is the idea of asagat gvul, which means if someone has a bakery, don't open a bakery next door to them. Which I don't know if in civil law today that would be a right to refuse the neighbor to do it. But in Jewish law, there's a discussion about it. There's one thing which you're actually allowed to do, which is open a school, because it says, or school or yeshiva or something like that, because kinat sofrim, the jealousy between different teachers, different students, will only increase wisdom, because it'll make everyone have to try harder and work harder. But other things, it says there's also an idea not to, if a person from a different city shouldn't open up a bakery in that city if there's already previous bakers. For the same reason, not to infringe on someone, encroach on someone else's business.
Shuls.
The big discussion about shuls. At the end of the day, Jewish custom has always been to open more shuls, but as the famous joke of the Jew in the desert island are about to open two shuls. Yeah. So then we speak about the laws of testimony. We need to have in Jewish court only goes with eyewitnesses. There's no beyond the reasonable doubt. There's all this stuff is not admissible in a Jewish court. It had to be two people who actually saw it. There's a story in the Talmud of a rabbi who walked into a abandoned building, and he sees a guy running out with a sword with blood dripping on it, and he walks in and he sees the guy stabbed. But that's not enough. No one saw the act. There was no clear. So that's by both capital cases and also by monetary cases. Monetary cases, the bar of testimony is not as high. You could rely on written evidence, different things, but it's pretty high stakes to. So then, if you look at verse 21 on page 1175, it speaks there about. And the famous words of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, and a foot for a foot, which is also spoken in the Parashat Mishpatim. It does not mean literally that if someone knocked in someone's eye, you take his eye out. It means you pay for it. It doesn't mean you pay for the damages of someone's eye. If you evaluate the damages of, let's say, how much someone would be willing to be paid to be blinded, or other cases like that, doesn't mean you actually do it to him. Then we have an interesting law of when you go out to war. It speaks about the preparations you have to make, and it says that you should not be afraid. There's a mitzvah not to be afraid of the enemy. Then there is the idea of a kohen, of a specially anointed priest who comes and speaks to the people, and he delivers an address to the people, telling them before they go out to war that you're about to go out to fight the enemy. Firstly, you have to say the Shema, which is, I think, many Israeli troops still today, they say the Shema before going out to battle. And you're not allowed to let your hearts become faint when you see the enemy, because if one person gets afraid, it's going to cause a ripple effect, and the stampede and the retreat is terrible. The Ark of the Covenant would go out with the people to war. Depends on which war, but many of the wars, the Ark of the Covenant will go out with the people, and the Kohen would give these very interesting warning. He said, anyone who built a new house and not yet inaugurated the house should go home in case he'll die in the war, in the battle, and he won't be able to enjoy his house. Then he says that if anyone who planted a new vineyard and didn't yet enjoy the crops should go home lest he die in battle and he'll never enjoy his vineyard. Anyone who's betrothed a woman and not yet consecrated the marriage should go home and not fight in case he dies and he will never have his marriage. And the last thing he adds is anyone who's afraid, was faint-hearted, go home. Don't stay.
Doesn't that contradict the first one that you got me to?
I mean, they're afraid, but if you're afraid, go home. Don't stay in the battle. Because all these cases, if people are going to be anxious about the things, it's going to only cause a very negative downfall. And then anyone who's there left after that, they're not allowed to leave. Anyone who's gone through all those stages has to stay and has to go out to fight the war. Then there's the laws of laying siege. First, you have to propose peace when you lay siege in a city. If they respond with peace, then you make the deal, whatever it is. The people become tribute, they pay tribute to you, whatever it is. Now, if they don't want to make peace with you, it's verse 12 on page 1179. You have to, if they don't make peace with you, you can be certain that it will eventually wage war against you if you leave it unconquered. You must therefore besiege it, and if necessary, you have to starve its inhabitants, you make them suffer from thirst, you kill them until they surrender. So in the Hebrew, there's a word ad ridita, till you've finished off the war. The worst thing to do in a war is imagine you're a surgeon or someone, and you open up the surgery and there's too much blood. So then you close up the surgery, you come back in 2 weeks, we'll finish the surgery. Then you open up again, and then it's too much blood. So you close it up, and I come back in a month, we'll do it again. That's the worst thing to do. And take that analogy and tell it's the worst thing to do in a war. When you fight a war, you don't fight it to make memorandums of understanding and come back again and come back again and come again. So there's actually a mitzvah in the Torah that when you wage a war, you fight a war, you have to fight it to the end.
Well, that's what's happening around.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't have to spell it out. Yeah.
I know what you're referring to.
So then there's actually an interesting law, which if you remember, we learned it both in the full humankind course and also in the first course this year in what was it called? In the Kabbalah meaning, which was the law of not cutting down fruit trees. Because a man is like a tree in the field. So if a tree is going to be able to produce and be able to grow forth fruit, you don't cut down. And from there, we actually learn the laws of not wasting anything that's useful. Something which is not useful, then it's not considered a waste to remove it. But anything which is like a fruit tree and it's fruit bearing, you don't cut it down because it can grow fruit. Then there's the last thing in this Parshat is the law of the unsolved murder. When you find someone dead in the field and you don't know who killed him, this guy just dead there. Now, first thing is, if someone dies like that, they actually acquire their place where they died as their burial spot, even if it's the middle of the road. They get buried in that spot. Second point is a very interesting ceremony which happens, which is the elders and the judges of the city come with a measure from which city is the closest city to that dead body, and they then, once they've established which city is the closest city, they go to a stream and they take a calf and they hack off its neck with a hatchet, and then the sages wash their hands in the stream and say, our hands have not shed the blood of this person. And the real point of this all is to bring out the severity of someone dying in the middle of the road, which means that no one escorted this person. This person was left on his own. It was not part of a entourage. It wasn't part of a group. The people in the city he had come from hadn't looked out for him, hadn't taken care of him. And the Hebrew words, which are this, Yadeno lo shafchu et hadam hazeh, our hands have not spilled this blood, have become a rallying cry many times. And say, can we really say that we don't have any part in whatever the situation that's happened? Have we really done everything? Are we really absolved? Have we really done everything we could possibly do? And the priest then, and this ceremony, dress God and say, grant atonement for your people, and do not lay the guilt of the innocent blood upon your people Israel. If you find the murderer later, you still have to put the murderer to death if there's witnesses, etc. Yeah.
So what are they doing? Busting with the
water in the stream. It's an interesting ceremony. Okay, let's talk about anyone have any questions before we talk about the king.
Who was the last king?
Who was the last king?
Zedekiah.
You know that you're all over there.
So the question is what's considered a king?
Davidic king was Zedekiah.
That was in the first temple. In the second temple, there was Zerubbabel who
Yeah.
had the halachic definition of a king. Herod did not have a halachic definition of a king, but Agrippas did. It's an interesting discussion that if you know the second temple history, there are different kings at the time and different ones at different. If Agrippa had a halachic the criteria of being a king. So let's say the kings of the Hasmonean Hashmonaim, the ones who fought the battle of Hanukkah and their descendants, halachically were considered kings. It wasn't the right thing to do because they weren't from the Davidic dynasty; they were Kohanim, they were priests, but they were halachically kings. And all the laws of a king, which we spoke about, would apply to them. Herod was not considered halachically a king. He was a tyrant, a ruler, and a dictator wherever he was, and he ruled over the country. But he wasn't halachically Jewish. His grandson Agrippas, I think his great grandson Agrippas his mother was Jewish, and therefore had the laws of a king applied.
Let's have Agrippas Street in Yerushalayim. That's interesting.
They probably named after him.
Yeah.
Now, Maimonides calls the king the heart of the Jewish people. Why is he called the king the heart of the Jewish people? So the way he says it is that just like the vitality of a person, the person's life force, a person's feeling, a person's emotions, and a person's living is dependent on the heart. The Jewish people as a whole are dependent on the king. Have this relationship with the king in that manner. Now you would think that the king should be more like the brain of the Jewish people, the head. That you would say that the king is the head of the Jewish people. He goes out in front of the people. He leads the people. Why would we say specifically the heart? So, in a way, the king is quite a dichotomy. On one hand, the king has a very awesome power. He was allowed to enslave who he wanted to work in his fields. He was allowed to take anyone to join his armies. He was allowed to basically ask anyone to be his consort. He had access to tax and whatever it is as he wished. On the other hand, he has quite a weakness that he's dependent on the people. He doesn't have any income of his own, so to speak. A regular person works for a living, produces, farms, whatever they were doing, sells, whatever their role was, and that's how they made the income. The king is dependent on the people. So on the one hand, he's quite awesome, he's quite mighty, he has very strong control, so to speak. He has a lot of rights that other people don't have. On the other hand, all those rights are really dependent on the people. They're really dependent on if the people pay him to give him his dues. And it's similar to what Alan mentioned before, that the king was appointed by God. Was Prophet Samuel, different ones were anointed, whatever the kings were anointed. On the other hand, the people have to accept him as a king. If the people don't accept him as a king, he's not a king. He's a tyrant. He's a dictator. He might have control of the country. He might rule the. He's not a king of the Jewish people. The king of the Jewish people is not only a technical way of what's happening, who's running the country. It's also a religious and halachic and moral role. What do you want to ask?
How is it different from Kohen Gadol? What is like differentiates?
So there's three roles actually. There's the Kohen Gadol, which would be the high priest. He runs all the temporal, religious, ritualistic things in the temple. Then there is the leader of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, which would be the final halachic, rabbinic arbiter of decisions. Together with the Sanhedrin, together with the High Court, but he would have that leadership, the teaching of the Torah role. And then there is the king, the political leader, but the political leader is not just a guy who could just come up and rule the people by force. It's a person who has a religious aspect. We'll speak about it in a second.
How is Kohen Gadol appointed?
Kohen Gadol is a hereditary position from father to son who's a Kohen. If he's not, if the son is not worthy, or there's no son which could fill the place, then the Sanhedrin would appoint the Kohen Gadol. Had to be a Kohen, obviously. Had to be a Kohen over the age of. The discussion has to be over the age of 13, or over the age of 18, or the age of 20. That's a discussion in the Talmud. But the Kohen Gadol was appointed by the Sanhedrin, if there was no son of the previous Kohen to take over. Now, if you want to go back to the Torah times, who was the Kohen Gadol? Was Aaron, then Elazar. Who was the king? Moses, Moshe, and he also was the leader of the Sanhedrin. Meaning Moshe and even Joshua had a double role. They were both the political leader and the Torah leader. To the point that, if you remember a few weeks ago, we spoke of Pinchas in Parashat Pinchas, that Moshe wanted to appoint his sons as the next leader. We said that obviously Moshe knew his sons weren't as great scholars as Joshua. What he was asking from God was, make Joshua the Torah leader, and my sons, they're definitely good generals, they're definitely good political leaders, they could run the way to the thing. And then God told Moshe, no, Joshua needs to have both roles. For the generation entering land needs to be a single unit that has both the political and the Torah leadership. Now, going back to our heart analogy, the heart has those two similarities to a king. The heart is constantly pumping, constantly moving. It's working very hard. On the other hand, it's very weak. Heart failure is quite a common, much more common, let's say, than brain shutting down. Right? A brain is more aloof, above. In general, if you want to compare emotions to intellect is cold. Intellect is not moving, not excited. It's rational, facts. And the heart, emotions, feelings, moving, exciting, getting angry, upset, happy, constantly fear, love. And that's more like the king. The heart is running the system of the body in a way. The blood is pumping through the heart. On the other hand, the heart doesn't have a very stable existence for itself. It's constantly moving. It's constantly pumping. So the king is similar to the heart in this way. He's the heart of the Jewish people. He's the reason why we're so worried about the king not veering off the path and being moral and being just is because if the king is corrupt and the king is immoral, then it doesn't bode very well for the people of the country. The people of the country are also going to fall into that way of living. And as we've seen in Jewish history, on the other hand, when the king is just and the king is following the Torah and the king is behaving properly, behaving morally, then he's a leader in that sense for the Jewish people. The leader of the Sanhedrin, on the other hand, is like the brain. He's more removed. He definitely directs the nation in thought and discussion and the way of Torah, the way of living, but he doesn't have that day-to-day interface with the people of running the mood of the country, running the mood of the people.
Now that we don't have a temple, I understand we can't have it. There's no Sanhedrin.
There was a Sanhedrin for another 200 years after the temple, but yes, it says the temple, the Sanhedrin, 40 years before the temple was destroyed, the Sanhedrin exiled itself from the temple. It no longer sat at the temple, and then it lasted for around about 200 years till it was finally closed down by the Romans.
Is it the same with a king, though? Because since that time, there was
so even in Babylon, let's say, when the Jews, which I'm talking about at the time after the second temple was destroyed, there was something called the Reish Galuta, which means the head of the exile, or the exiler, as they say in English. And many of the halachic laws of a king would apply to him, meaning it's like today, we all live in a country where everyone's citizens of the same country. But in Babylon at the time, or in it was Iraq, wherever it was, the Jewish community ran itself. It controlled itself. So in a way, even though he didn't have armies, wasn't running political affairs for the whole state. He was the head of the exile was running the Jewish affairs, and the way he was a king to some extent. He wasn't a king in the fullest. He wasn't a real king. Has no one above him besides for God. That's the expression of the Talmud. So a real king, there's no Roman emperor above you, and there's no American president above you. There's only one higher than the king is God himself.
So your Reish Galuta is the same as what? As
The Reish Galuta had many of the halachic properties, I guess, characteristics of a king, of a Nasi. To the point that in the Talmud, there was Rabbi Huda Nasi, which is the one who actually wrote the Mishnah down. He said, "What would, if there was a temple, would I be the one who brings?" There's a law we didn't learn in the Parshat Vayikra. It's a law that if a Nasi, if the Jewish leader sins, he has a special sacrifices to bring for the sin. It's called a kizbah. It's called a female. There's a female sheep that he brings for his sin. So he said, what would be my role? Would I have to bring that sacrifice if I sinned? So one of his students told him, no, because there's the Reish Galuta, the head of the exile in Babylon. He was living in Israel. There's the head of the exile in Babylon who has more political rulership than you do. He's quite upset at that, but that's leave that aside in the Talmud. But the exile, I don't even say it in English. The head of the exile, he was many characteristics. He had a political leadership and therefore halakhic leadership, being a kick. Now you're asking if it could be a king nowadays. If it's saying the theory, there could be a king nowadays. Firstly, you would have to. There's a whole discussion that you need a Sanhedrin to have a king, because who anoints the king? Who anoints the king? A prophet or a Sanhedrin. If we don't have a prophet, if we don't have any apparent prophet, who's going to anoint the king? And if there's no Sanhedrin, it becomes like a catch-22. Who could appoint who?
Chicken and egg.
And the reason why we don't have a Sanhedrin today is because we don't have smicha. Smicha is we do have rabbinical ordination, which we call smicha, but the real smicha was a hand down from Moshe. Moshe literally, as we learned a few weeks ago, laid his hands on Joshua and passed on to him the power to decide halacha, and Joshua passed on to his students, and that smicha literally, which means leaning, passed on all the way till it's phased out at some point for 300-400 years after the second temple was destroyed, and there's a whole discussion: could you reinstitute smicha? So Maimonides said that in his opinion, if all the rabbis in the land of Israel would get together and decide to reinstitute it, they could reinstitute. There was actually an attempt in the 1500s to do it, and it became a very big controversy between. You can have a class in that in itself. It became a great controversy because there was one rabbi in Jerusalem who wasn't invited to the rabbis in Tzafat and Safed who did it, and became a whole big thing. Is this smicha? Is that not smicha? The one who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the one who wrote the Code of Jewish Law, Yosef Karai, he received smicha in that 1500 the controversy.
Well,
yeah, it's interesting.
I'm confused. I'm sorry.
Yes.
We had no dynasty for about 350 years at all.
Yes.
Between Babylonian destruction and even if you, as you said, that even if we assume that Maccabi family became kings, which they did not, and but let's
They had halachic.
they didn't, but let's just
Okay.
I can argue that point, but even if I go with you, we did not have about 350 years. So that means that smicha thing was lost.
No, smicha is a separate. There's two different.
We did not have a king.
Smicha is different than king.
They actually.
We're confusing two things. Smicha is passing on halachic deciding. It's
No, but
Moshe, since Joshua, this is the mistake. Moses and Joshua were both. Moshe and Yeshua were both political and Torah. The smicha is talking about Torah, and that was continuous. There was no pause to that. We have even the names of who were the rabbis in each generation passing on. The Maimonides counts 40 generations of the Torah being passed down from Moses to the sealing of the Talmud, which was the year 300 CE.
Back to that discussion: who can be anointed to the king? let's go back to what
Who's going to anoint the king? The reason why there's no king today is because there hasn't been identified as the Davidic descendants who could clearly be a king.
I can answer that question.
If a Davidic descendant would arise, a descendant of David would arise and could prove that he's descended from David, and he would check all the boxes to be a king, which, I mean, not all the kings did this, but the boxes, the criteria to be a king is to fulfill Torah mitzvahs, like David did, to fight wars. The question is, would he be anointed? Do you need smicha to have a Sanhedrin? Do you need a Sanhedrin to have a king?
I personally think much longer. So we have a precedent how they have become a king. So technically speaking, that precedent can be repeated. We do not need to make up things because we have a precedent of.
Technically speaking, if a Davidic descendant will arise and fit the criteria to be a king, he could be a king. Yes.
We can do DNA testing.
I don't know if that's enough. I don't know. Again, I don't know. You might need to actually have names and lineage, but in theory, yes. To the point.
I mean, to the point that those kings were actually not of.
They were not Davidic.
Of Davidic, and yet they have become because one king decided they can't keep it, and now
we have to define this idea of this. We have to define this idea of a Davidic king and non-Davidic kings. David was promised that his descendant, that the rulership will never be taken away from his the descendants. Correct. At the same time, 2 generations later, there were kings of Israel which broke away, and 10 tribes were taken away, and made their own many dynasties as there were. There was for a few hundred years of different dynasties in Italy. That's not a negation to the fact that there will always be a Davidic dynasty, and therefore any other person or dynasty that arises and do have the political leadership could be considered a king. Doesn't take away that there has to be a Davidic, and there will be a descendant of David who will be Mashiach is considered the ultimate king and descendant of David. But
the point is that there's a king before.
Yeah, that was a deal David made with God, and according to, for example, is in the when you read the book of Isaiah, Isaiah says, Isaiah is a prophet. So he said, God will send you an anointed one. An anointed, the word anointed means Mashiach. So this idea, so, you can find hints of Mashiach in Torah. You can find it. But you can, it's only hints. And the only reason we can find these hints is because we are looking at this text retrospectively, right?
Interestingly about anointed, you mentioned before there were only 6 kings that are anointed. Maimonides codifies that when do you have to anoint a king? Only for one of 2 reasons. Either there was machlekes, there's an argument of who should be king, or to fix a new dynasty. So David was Saul was anointed. It was anointed differently. It was anointed differently than David, but he was anointed. David was anointed. It's the beginning of a new dynasty. Now, Solomon, Shlomo, David's son, was also anointed. Why? Because he had an older brother who was pretending for the throne. So therefore, he had to anoint it to show that he's clearly the king. And later you have King Yehu, which was one of the kings of Israel, the 10 tribes. He was anointed again. It was a case of when there's dissension of who should be the king. There's this idea of anointing. Who else was anointed in the Torah? Aaron was anointed. The original priests were anointed. The Mishkan, when it was inaugurated, was anointed. It's a very interesting. The whole idea of pouring oil, which is a certain religion that the whole name of their religion comes from this word of anointing. That's they've taken that idea, but it's a very rare and very mystical, so to speak, like very interesting thing. What is this?
Yeah,
they copy from.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wasn't it when he and king and the whole oil?
They copy from.
Yeah.
That's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It has to be.
It was interesting that they do copy. How much was copied? It was like.
Well, there's descriptions in Tanakh in the Bible about how they. One more point I wanted to say.
So why can't we build the temple?
Why can't we build a temple? Good question. Firstly, right now we don't have control. Right now we don't have control of the Temple Mount. If we would, that's already a different discussion. Secondly, it's not fair to have this discussion now, Margarita here. No, but why can't we build a temple? No, really, the really first thing is, as I said actually on Shavuos when at 3 o'clock in the morning, Eugene Margarita were pushing me on this point of why I can't build a temple, is that in 1968 and 1969, the Rebbe told all Chabad followers in Jerusalem to leave Jerusalem on the day of before Pesach. Why? Because if they would be in Jerusalem, there would be a big question if they have to go up to the Temple Mount to bring up the Paschal lamb. Because the current Pesach doesn't need a temple. It can be done on the Temple Mount even if the temple is destroyed. Now, because it's very where are you allowed to go up on the Temple Mount? Which areas? Do you have to have a proper purification, a proper mikveh? It's very complicated. They said to leave the city of Jerusalem. 1970, though, the Rabbi already told them they don't have to leave because it was already for sure that the Israeli government had already given it to the Waqf and given it over to unfortunately give it over to the Arabs. So right now we don't actually practically have control of the Temple Mount. So that's the first thing why we can't build a temple.
There's also Jews there at the moment.
We're going. That's again a whole long discussion. Where they go, how they go, which parts are okay, which not. It's complicated. It's definitely very complicated discussion. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it shouldn't be in their hands. It should be in Jewish hands. It should not be. It shouldn't be messages sent on whatever June, whatever what day. The next day after the 6th day, on the 7th day or the 8th day of the 6th Day War, they were already sending messages that we're going to give it back to you. So that's already that was the travesty back then. We have to build a temple. It's true. The question is if we speak about it. When do we speak about it?
A few times.
A few times already.
Yeah.
Is the order that Maimonides codifies is that Messiah will be the one to lead, Mashiach will be the one to lead the temple building project. So, and that the precursor to that is needed to defeat your enemies. Remember, King David. Why for 350 years that when they entered the land of Israel, or even more, almost 450 years, no one thought to go build a temple. They had the Mishkan in Shiloh, they had a sanctuary, they had a traveling temple, they had a temporary one, and no one built the temple. Time didn't come because they hadn't yet vanquished all the enemies. King David did a very good job at that, knocked down all the enemies. Well, Shaul was meant to do it. King Shaul was meant to do it with Amalek, and he didn't do it all the way. King David did it much more to all the different enemies. Finally, Shlomo was able to build a temple. That had to be the peace. The second temple was a big discussion because it was I guess it was with permission of the hegemon of the world superpower then. But today I don't think anyone would say that we are independent and able to have vanquished all enemies from all around us, and we're able to go and build a temple. That's if we look last Parshat already was that when God has given you peace from all your enemies, then you go ahead and build the temple. It doesn't make sense. The temple has to come after when you have proper full control, full political control. Do we have a prophet nowadays? Now, interesting like this. The Talmud says that Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi is the end of the prophecy. After there's the three last prophets, they're the three last of the minor prophets, who they actually lived into the Second Temple time, and they're the ones who were very involved in building the Second Temple and telling everyone where exactly the places were meant to build. Maimonides says in his letter to Taman, which is his letter to the community in Yemen, which were suffering from a false messiah and for different things. I think we spoke about it in the captivating cases about that guy who was claiming to be Messiah. He says that prophecy never really left. There were different bandwidth of prophecy, different how the intensity of prophecy. But if someone was practicing all the criteria that need to be a prophet, he was righteous and he was strong-minded, strong heart, whatever it is, and one of them has to be financially wealthy, then it's possible that he will be able to tune into like the radio waves, the frequency of prophecy. And he actually says that he has a tradition that is actually around his time that prophecy will start returning. And you had multiple cases throughout Jewish history of, I don't know if we would call it full-on prophets, but you would call it a prophet light or prophet or people with Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh, which means Holy Spirit. It's not a prophecy the way the the 48 prophets of the Torah, but there is some level of prophecy. To the point that even in the times of the Torah, there were many, many more prophets than the 48 that are listed. But there's a rule that a prophecy which was needed for future generations was written down. Prophecy that wasn't needed for future generations, it was just for that time of what it was, that wasn't written. Then throughout the ages, as time has gone on, there has been more prophetical vision. As the time gets closer to the Messianic age, there has been more revelation of prophecy. I referenced in the beginning of the class that the beginning of the Parshat was Shoftim v'Shotrim, judges and policemen. It speaks about, in the Messianic age, it says there will be judges and advisors. There won't be policemen. What's the difference between a judge and an advisor? A judge is very top down. He tells you what to do. He rules the law. An advisor is an opposite. He's on your level, so to speak, and he's advising you, guiding you, giving you counsel, giving you advice towards your goal. Towards the Messianic age, and in the Messianic age, the prophet's role is going to be much more like an advisor than less like a judge. He'll less be to tell you the word of God top down, more to advise you within what you already know within yourself to the right conclusion. So as time has gone on, definitely from the advent of Kabbalah and of Chassidus and of different Rebbes throughout the time, there has been more prophecy or more prophecy-like expression. To the point that the Rebbe, one I mentioned about the previous Rebbe, that he had given many predictions, and you would look at those predictions and you could ascertain that's the idea of prophecy. Is it visions? Is it losing out-of-body experiences? Not necessarily, but definitely predictions for the future and blessings. That definitely we do have today, and we did have throughout Jewish history.
A high level of insight into.
If you look, once upon a time, the prophet was more to bring the word of God in a way of awe and top down. Today, the prophet is more an advisory stage, more telling you this is what's really good for you, explaining to you, working with you on your level, on your.
Does that love above people, or is that
That's a different concept. That is, every generation has hidden tzaddikim, but it's a different.
So the whole idea of the prophet is why we have Elijah cup on the Pesach table, is that we're waiting for Elijah the prophet to come, and hence we don't have prophets until Elijah comes and brings forward the Messianic time.
Elijah's prophecy, it says that Elijah's prophecy. We're waiting for his prophecy.
That's one.
We're waiting for his prophecy. We're waiting for Elijah's prophecy because his prophecy that's going to come is, I will send the prophecy is I will send you Elijah the prophet who will be the herald and foretell the Mashiach coming. And the Talmud says that every single day Elijah comes to Tiberia and Tiberias because since Mashiach can come any day, so Elijah comes every day because not just come the day before Mashiach comes. So he comes every day to Tiberias. Maybe today will be the day that he'll be sent to the time. I think we are very well. Any other questions?
Lovely, thank you.
Anything else? Anything else? Not.
I preferred your lecture than my lecture.
I'm not related to the king, but I was just informed before, and we're talking about this like sage in the cities, and yes, so
Which one is it? Which verse?
the cities that surrender, the cities.
Yeah, sure.
City that doesn't surrender, so you have to kill all the males, but all the women and children and all the wealth, take it to yourself.
Basically, you kill the combatants. You kill the combatants, all the males.
Yeah.
The non-combatants, you are become now.
I mean, and again, there is like a differentiation between the people in like nations in
the seven nations. The 7 nations of Israel have to be. They actually sued for peace first. One of the 7 actually escaped Africa, the Girgashi. The other 6 fought against the Jewish people.
Yeah.
They have the mitzvah to eradicate from land. As we spoke last week, that if they stay there, you have bad influence.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this I understand, but I don't understand the land that is like far away So, and they don't surrender. So you kill all the males, but you can take women and children, over what. So, I mean, how
It's a very
the beauty of Jewish.
it's a very 21st century war that you think that when you fight a war, then everything goes back to the way it was before. For hundreds and thousands of years, we knew that if you if a war breaks out and you lose the war, then you lose territory and you lose your people and you lose your say that this is the way of war throughout history.